The studio lights dimmed to a softer glow than usual. This wasn't going to be one of those explosive episodes where families screamed accusations across the stage. Tonight was different. Tonight, Dr. Phil McGraw sat in a more intimate setting, a circular arrangement of comfortable chairs, warm lighting, and an audience that had been specifically chosen. Young couples, recently married couples, couples who were still figuring out what forever actually meant when the honeymoon glow started to fade. "Welcome," Dr. Phil began, his voice carrying that distinctive blend of Texas directness and genuine warmth. "Tonight, we're talking about something that sounds simple but trips up more couples than you'd think. The first year of marriage. You know, when I tell people I've been married to Robin for over 40 years, they always ask the same question. What's the secret? And I always give them the same answer. We survived year one." The audience laughed, but there was a nervous energy in the room. These weren't people watching other people's problems unfold. They were here because they were living it. The confusion, the adjustments, the reality that marriage wasn't quite what the wedding day had promised. Seated closest to Dr. Phil were Jake and Emma Patterson, 26 and 24 years old respectively, married for exactly 9 months. They looked tired, not physically exhausted, but emotionally drained in that way people get when they've been having the same argument for weeks without resolution. "Jake, Emma, thank you for being willing to talk about what you're going through," Dr. Phil said, settling into his chair. "Tell me, when you two got married, what did you think that first year was going to look like?" Emma spoke first, her voice soft but carrying frustration. "I thought we'd be happy. I mean, we were so in love. We'd been dating for 3 years. We thought we knew everything about each other." "And now?" Dr. Phil prompted. Jake jumped in. "Now we're fighting about things we never fought about before. Dishes, money. How often we see my parents versus her parents. Who takes out the trash. It's like, we used to be best friends, and now we're roommates who can't stand each other half the time." Dr. Phil nodded slowly, recognition in his eyes. "Let me ask you both something. Did anyone at all sit you down before the wedding and tell you what to actually expect? Not the row kick version, the real version." They both shook their heads. "That's the problem," Dr. Phil continued, leaning forward. "We spend thousands of dollars on weddings. We obsess over flowers and cake and the perfect song for the first dance. But nobody prepares couples for what happens on day 814 when you realize your spouse loads the dishwasher completely wrong and it's driving you absolutely insane." The audience erupted in knowing laughter. That was the thing about Dr. Phil. He had this ability to take something that felt deeply personal and shameful and make it universal. Suddenly, Jake and Emma weren't alone. They were part of a shared human experience. "So, let's break this down," Dr. Phil said, shifting into what the production crew called his teaching mode. "The first year of marriage is hard. Period. End of discussion. It doesn't matter how compatible you are, how long you dated, how much you love each other. That first year is going to test you in ways you never anticipated, and you know why." He paused, looking around the room. "Because marriage isn't an extension of dating. It's a completely different relationship structure. When you're dating, you can go home. You have your own space. You can take a break when things get tense. But in marriage, you're building a life together. Every single decision now affects 2 people. And that adjustment? It's massive." Another couple, seated to the right, raised their hands tentatively. Dr. Phil gestured for them to speak. "I'm Vanessa. This is Marcus. We've been married for 11 months, the woman said. "And honestly, Dr. Phil, I feel like we made a mistake. Not marrying each other, but the timing. We're constantly stressed about money. We both work full-time, but we can barely afford our apartment. And Marcus wants to start trying for a baby. And I keep thinking, how can we afford a child when we can't even afford to fix our car?" Marcus looked defensive. "We talked about having kids before we got married. You said you wanted them." "I do want them," Vanessa shot back. "But I also want to not be drowning in credit card debt." Dr. Phil held up a hand. "Okay, stop. Both of you. Just stop for a second." His voice was firm but not harsh. "Vanessa, Marcus, what you're experiencing is one of the most common conflicts in young marriages. And it's not actually about babies or money. It's about something deeper." They both looked at him, confused. "It's about expectations that weren't clearly communicated before you said 'I do,'" Dr. Phil explained. "Marcus, when you talked about having kids before marriage, what did that conversation look like?" Marcus shrugged. "We said we both wanted them someday. We agreed on 2, maybe 3. But did you talk about when?" Did you discuss your financial goals? Did you map out what your life needed to look like before you were ready? Dr. Phil pressed.
Silence.
That's what I thought, Dr. Phil continued. You had a vague conversation about a future dream, but you didn't create an actual plan. And now you're 9 months into marriage, reality has hit, and you're both surprised that you're not on the same page. He turned to address the entire audience. Here's what I want everyone in this room to understand. The first year of marriage fails or succeeds based on 2 things. Communication and expectations. That's it. If you can master those 2 things, everything else becomes manageable. A hand shot up from the back of the audience. Dr. Phil nodded toward a young man with glasses. Dr. Phil, I'm Aaron. I've been married for 6 months. And honestly, my biggest issue is that my wife and I have completely different ideas about what marriage should look like. She wants us to do everything together. Every meal, every weekend activity, every decision. And I feel suffocated. I need space sometimes. But when I tell her that, she thinks I don't love her. Dr. Phil's expression softened. Aaron, come on down here. Let's talk about this. Aaron made his way to the stage area, sitting in an empty chair. His wife, who had been sitting beside him, followed reluctantly. What's your name? Dr. Phil asked her. Sophie, she answered quietly. Sophie, when Aaron says he needs space, what goes through your mind? Sophie's eyes welled up immediately. I think he's pulling away. I think he regrets marrying me. We waited until marriage to live together, and I thought once we were married, we'd be inseparable. That's what marriage is, right? Being each other's everything. Dr. Phil shook his head gently. No, that's not what healthy marriage is. Sophie, can I be straight with you? She nodded, wiping her eyes. The idea that your spouse should be your everything, that's a romantic notion, but it's also a recipe for disaster. It puts impossible pressure on one human being. Aaron can't be your best friend, your therapist, your entertainment, your emotional support, your companion for every single moment. Nobody can sustain that. He turned to Aaron, and Aaron, when you say you need space, you're not wrong. But the way you're communicating it might be making Sophie feel rejected instead of understood. So what do I do? Aaron asked. You change the language, Dr. Phil said simply. Instead of saying, I need space, which sounds like you're running away from her, try saying, I need some time to recharge so I can be fully present with you later. See the difference? Same need, different framing. One makes her feel abandoned, the other makes her feel considered. Sophie looked at Aaron with something like hope in her eyes. Dr. Phil addressed the room again. Marriage is a language, and in that first year, you're both learning to speak it fluently. You're going to mess up. You're going to say things wrong. You're going to hurt each other's feelings without meaning to. That's normal. That's expected. The question is, are you willing to keep learning? A producer approached the stage, whispering something to Dr. Phil. He nodded, then looked back at the audience. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I want to talk about the things nobody tells you about year 1. The stuff that catches everyone off guard. During the commercial break, the energy in the studio shifted. Couples were talking to each other, some animated, some quiet and intense. The conversation Dr. Phil had started was continuing in whispered exchanges throughout the room. When the cameras came back on, Dr. Phil had changed his approach. Instead of sitting, he was standing, moving through the audience with a wireless microphone. Okay, let's do this differently, he began. I want to hear from those of you who've made it past year 1. Those of you who are in year 2, 3, 5, whatever. Tell these newlyweds the one thing you wish someone had told you. A woman in her early 30s stood up. I wish someone had told me that the person I married would change, and that was okay. My husband at year 5 isn't the same man He's grown. He's different, and I had to learn to fall in love with who he's becoming, not cling to who he was. Dr. Phil pointed at her. That right there, that's wisdom. Marriage isn't a museum where you preserve someone in amber. It's a garden where both of you grow and change, and if you're not growing together, you're growing apart. Another man stood, older, maybe late 40s. I wish someone had told me that my wife's way of doing things wasn't wrong just because it was different from mine. We spent our entire first year arguing about the stupidest things. How to fold towels, what temperature to keep the house, when to go to bed. And it wasn't until year 2 that I realized none of that actually mattered. What mattered was respecting each other enough to find compromise. Can I add something to that? Dr. Phil interjected. There's a concept in psychology called perpetual problems. These are conflicts in relationships that never fully resolve because they stem from fundamental personality differences. About 69% of relationship conflicts are perpetual. They're not solvable, but they are manageable. Jake, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. So you're saying Emma and I are always going to argue about how she takes forever to get ready? Probably, Dr. Phil said with a slight smile. But the question isn't whether that annoyance goes away. The question is whether you can approach it with humor and grace instead of contempt and criticism. Big difference. Emma laughed despite herself. He's got a point, Jake. You're not going to suddenly become patient, and I'm not going to suddenly get ready in 5 minutes. Exactly, Dr. Phil affirmed. Marriage isn't about fixing each other. It's about accepting each other while also being willing to grow. Those are two different things. A young woman in the front row raised her hand tentatively. Dr. Phil acknowledged her. Dr. Phil, my name is Rachel. I've been married for 4 months, and I'm scared because my husband and I are fighting way more than I expected. Does that mean we're not compatible? Dr. Phil walked over to her. Rachel, how often are you fighting? Maybe twice a week. About what? Different things. His ex-girlfriend keeps texting him. We disagree about how to spend our weekends. He thinks I'm too critical. I think he's too defensive. Dr. Phil nodded thoughtfully. Here's what I'm going to tell you, and I want everyone to hear this. Conflict in marriage isn't a sign that something's wrong. Conflict is inevitable when two separate people try to build one shared life. The question isn't whether you fight, it's how you fight and whether you repair afterward. He addressed the entire audience again. Research shows that successful marriages aren't the ones without conflict. They're the ones where couples have learned to fight fair and make up effectively. You want to know the real predictors of divorce. It's not conflict, it's contempt, criticism, defensiveness. Stonewalling. Those are the 4 horsemen that destroy relationships. Marcus, from earlier, raised his hand. Dr. Phil, can you break those down? Because I think Vanessa and I might be doing some of those things. Absolutely, Dr. Phil said, moving back to the center. Contempt is when you treat your spouse with disgust or superiority. It's eye-rolling, name-calling, mockery. It's the most corrosive behavior in any relationship. Criticism is attacking your partner's character instead of addressing a specific behavior. Like saying, you're so lazy instead of I felt frustrated when you didn't help with dishes last night. See the difference? People were nodding, some taking notes on their phones. Defensiveness is when you respond to complaints by making excuses or counterattacking instead of taking responsibility. And stonewalling is when you shut down completely, give the silent treatment, withdraw emotionally. Any of this sounding familiar? Hands went up all over the audience. Good, Dr. Phil said. Because recognizing these patterns is the first step to changing them. Now let me tell you what successful couples do instead. He walked back to his chair, sitting down in that deliberate way he had when he was about to deliver something important. Successful couples in that first year learn 5 critical skills. First, they turn toward each other instead of away. When your spouse makes a bid for attention, a comment about their day, a joke, a request for help, you respond. You don't ignore, you don't dismiss. You turn toward them. Emma leaned over to Jake, whispering something. He nodded, and they held hands. Second skill, Dr. Phil continued. They practice what researchers call positive sentiment override. Basically, they give each other the benefit of the doubt. When your spouse does something annoying, you assume good intentions instead of immediately thinking the worst. Your husband left his socks on the floor. Maybe he was distracted and forgot, not purposely trying to irritate you. Vanessa spoke up. That's hard though, Dr. Phil. When the same thing keeps happening over and over, it's hard not to think it's intentional. You're right, it is hard, Dr. Phil acknowledged. But here's the thing. When you constantly assume negative intent, you create a negative reality. Your spouse feels attacked, gets defensive, and now you're in a cycle. But when you approach with curiosity instead of accusation, hey, I noticed your socks are on the floor again, what's going on? You open a door for actual conversation instead of combat. A man in the audience called out, what's the third skill? Third skill is creating rituals of connection, Dr. Phil answered. These are non-negotiable times when you prioritize your relationship. Could be a weekly date night. Could be 15 minutes every evening where you sit together and talk without phones. Could be a goodbye kiss every morning. Doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that it's consistent and sacred. Sophie raised her hand. Aaron and I don't really have that. Then that's your homework, Dr. Phil said directly to them. Before you leave here today, agree on one ritual. One thing you'll do consistently to stay connected. Fourth skill, he went on, is learning your partner's emotional needs and meeting them. Some people need words of affirmation, some need quality time, some need physical touch, some need acts of service, some need gifts. If you're giving your spouse what you need instead of what they need, you're both going to end up feeling unloved even though you're both trying. Rachel nodded vigorously. That's us, exactly. I keep trying to spend time with him, and he keeps doing things for me like fixing stuff around the house, and we both feel unappreciated. Because you're speaking different love languages, Dr. Phil explained. He's saying I love you by fixing things. You're saying I love you by wanting time together. Neither of you is wrong. You're just not translating properly. And the fifth skill? Someone asked. Dr. Phil smiled. The fifth skill is the hardest one. It's learning to accept influence from your partner. Especially for men, this is challenging. Research shows that marriages where the husband refuses to be influenced by his wife have an 81% chance of failure. If you go into marriage thinking your way is always right, you're doomed. Jake shifted uncomfortably. I'll admit, I do that. Emma will suggest something, and my immediate reaction is to explain why my way is better. Why do you think that is? Dr. Phil asked. Jake thought for a moment. I guess because I feel like if I give in, I'm losing something, like I'm weak. And that, Dr. Phil said, pointing at Jake, is toxic masculinity at work. The idea that compromise equals weakness. Let me tell you what strength actually looks like in marriage. Strength is saying, you might be right. Let's try your way. Strength is admitting when you're wrong. Strength is being vulnerable enough to let your partner influence your decisions and your perspective. The atmosphere in the studio had completely shifted. This wasn't entertainment, this was education. Real, practical wisdom that these couples were absorbing like parched ground soaks up rain. Dr. Phil stood up again. I want to do something different now. I want to talk directly to those of you watching at home, those of you in this room, who are in that brutal first year, and wondering if you made a mistake. The room went silent. First, let me tell you what you didn't make a mistake about. You didn't make a mistake marrying someone you love. You didn't make a mistake committing to building a life together. What you might have made a mistake about is your expectation. If you thought marriage would be easy, that was the mistake. If you thought love alone would be enough, that was the mistake. If you thought your spouse would complete you, that was the mistake. He paused, letting that sink in. Marriage doesn't complete you. Marriage challenges you to become more complete as an individual, while learning to dance with someone else's completeness. It's the hardest, most rewarding work you'll ever do. And that first year, that's boot camp. That's where you learn the basics of how to fight together, instead of against each other. Vanessa had tears streaming down her face. Dr. Phil, what if we're not sure we can make it? What if the fighting is too much? Dr. Phil walked over to her and Marcus. Then you get help. There's no shame in seeing a therapist. None. You know what there is shame in? Letting your marriage die because you were too proud to ask for support. Marriage counseling isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're willing to invest in your relationship. He addressed the whole room again. Here's what I want everyone to take away from today. The first year of marriage is supposed to be hard. If it's hard, that doesn't mean you married the wrong person. It means you're normal. The question is, what do you do with that difficulty? Do you run from it? Do you blame your spouse? Do you build resentment? Or do you lean in, communicate honestly, seek help when needed, and trust that on the other side of this challenging year is something beautiful? Jake raised his hand. Dr. Phil, can I say something? Of course. Jake stood up, turning to Emma. I've been so focused on how hard this has been that I forgot why we're doing this. Emma, I love you. I don't want to fight about dishes and trash anymore. I want to learn how to be married to you. Really married. Not just living together and calling it marriage. Emma stood up too, crying now. I want that too. I'm sorry I've been so critical. I want us to work so badly that I've been panicking every time we fight. Dr. Phil smiled, a genuine warmth radiating from him. That right there, that's the breakthrough. When you can be vulnerable with each other about your fears, when you can admit you're struggling without blaming each other, that's when real intimacy begins. He looked around the studio. I've been doing this show for a long time. I've seen thousands of couples. And you know what the successful ones have in common? It's not that they don't fight. It's not that they have everything figured out. It's that they choose each other every single day, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. A producer signaled that they were running out of time. Dr. Phil nodded. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Your marriage is going to be whatever you build it to be. Not what your parents' marriage was. Not what you see in movies. What you actively, intentionally create together. And that first year, that's your foundation. Build it strong. Build it with honesty and patience and grace. Build it with the understanding that you're both going to mess up. And that's okay. Because here's the secret nobody tells you. Marriage doesn't get easier. You get better at it. The challenges don't disappear. You get stronger at facing them. The conflicts don't vanish. You get wiser at navigating them. He looked at each couple in turn. You can do this. You absolutely can. But you have to be willing to put in the work. You have to be willing to grow. You have to be willing to look at yourself first before you point at your spouse. The audience erupted in applause. But Dr. Phil held up a hand. One more thing. Tonight, when you go home, I want you to do something. Sit down with your spouse. No phones, no TV, no distractions. And I want you to ask them 2 questions. First, what's one thing I do that makes you feel loved? Second, what's one thing I could do better? And then, and this is crucial, just listen. Don't defend. Don't explain. Just listen. Sophie raised her hand. What if the answers are hard to hear? Then you thank your spouse for being honest enough to tell you the truth. Dr. Phil said simply, because that honesty, that's the foundation of everything. Without it, you're building on sand. With it, you can weather any storm. As the show concluded, couples throughout the audience were talking, some crying, some laughing, but all of them engaged in the hard, necessary work of actually communicating. Dr. Phil watched them for a moment before the final camera shot. This was why he did this. Not for the dramatic moments, or the viral clips, but for moments like this, when people realized they weren't alone in their struggles and that with the right tools and the right mindset, they could actually make it work. The first year of marriage, he said to the camera in closing, is like learning to dance with someone, while simultaneously learning what dance you're even doing. You're going to step on each other's toes. You're going to lose the rhythm. You're going to want to quit. But if you can just keep moving together, if you can laugh at the mistakes and celebrate the moments when you finally sync up, you'll discover something amazing. You'll discover that the dance becomes easier, more natural, more beautiful, and one day, you'll look at each other and realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're thriving. Together. The lights dimmed. The couples filed out slowly, many of them holding hands tighter than when they'd arrived. And in those clasped hands was something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Understanding. A roadmap through the chaos. Because that's what good advice does. It doesn't make the journey easier. It just helps you navigate it better. And sometimes, that makes all the difference.